Hello and welcome to Embrace the Deception. This is the first video in a series of videos called Spot the Lie. We're going to have someone tell two stories, one true and one false. It's your job to determine which story is the real deal and which is a fabrication. After you've watched both stories and made your decision, I'll break down the clues and tells to look for that you can use to spot the lie. Let's get started. So in the very beginning, she's just going to share a little bit of information and answer some questions that I asked so that we can get a baseline and see what she looks like when she's telling the truth.
Hi, my name is Anita. I'm from Poland, currently living in Houston, Texas. I have one brother. This morning I had a homemade smoothie for breakfast with kefir, strawberries, and frozen peaches. And my favorite subject in school was English. And this is because I used to love American pop music, and I was very curious what all of those singers were singing about. So I decided I have to learn English. So that's just the introduction. And now I wanted to tell you about my two stories. One is a true story and one is a lie. And I decided to go with a topic of weird fears. Unfortunately, I have some weird fears and weird anxieties about things, so let's see if you can figure out which one is true and which one is made up. Okay, so my very first weird fear revolves around belly buttons. So I don't know how to really explain it, but I have a weird I don't know, I feel very uneasy and uncomfortable around belly buttons. And I know that sounds already weird, because like, where are you around belly buttons? But for example, like in the shower or when I'm in bed, by myself, and I have like I touch my own body, or when I wash myself, I feel my own belly button. So I hate washing it, which is difficult already to admit, but I just try to avoid it. And I never look at it in the mirror. Even when I look at myself in the mirror, I try to avoid looking this direction. And also, I hate my husband's belly button, and I hope he will never see this video, but it kind of creeps me out because like things gather in his belly button, so it's like doubly disgusting. And yeah, that's my first story. My second story and my second weird fear is a fear of bubbles. And by bubbles I mean the foam, like when you, for example, have a bath and it's supposed to be a bubble bath and it's supposed to be like nice and romantic. Maybe somebody does that for you with some candles and stuff. Well, that creeps me out completely. When I was a child, I remember my mom used to make bubble baths for me for some reason, and I don't really remember how that fear developed because I cannot pinpoint the exact moment, but I remember one time I got so scared in the bath that those bubbles were going to swallow me, that I just kind of run out of the bath, like making all that mess. And it really has not subsided since then. It's kind of to the point that I only shower. I try not to have a bath at all. And any idea of like, oh, let's have a romantic bath. That's completely outside of my comfort zone. Okay, so the very first story that I said about belly buttons is completely made up. Completely. I am not afraid of belly buttons. In fact, I found them very cute, and there is nothing scary about them, and there never was anything scary about them. The second story, however, the fear of bubbles and foam, is absolutely real. When I was a child, that one time when I got so scared of bubbles, I really think it was the fact that they were kind of rising as I was getting into the bath. And maybe they got a little over my head and I got super scared. And since that time, I always feel very uncomfortable whenever I see foam. And I try to overcome my fear. I think like 3 years ago, there was this bubble foam party that I went to and nearly had a panic attack and had to be rescued from the place. So this is a real weird fear.
All right, so did you get it? If you guessed correctly, congratulations. If you didn't guess correctly, I'll break down some of the body language clues you can look for that could have tipped you off to which story was the fabrication. Before that, I want to quickly go over her baseline and point out a couple of things.
Hi, my name is Anita. I'm from Poland. Currently
So there's a couple of things in her baseline that are sometimes red flags of possible deception. She uses the question inflection when she talks. She says, "My name is Anita. I am from Poland." When your voice goes up, that's called the question inflection because it sounds like you're asking a question instead of making a statement. Sometimes people do that when they're lying because they're unsure of what they're saying. So if you ask a child if they took the last cookie out of the cookie jar, they might say no, like they're asking no. Do you believe that? But some people just talk like that. So in her case, when she's using the question inflection when she's telling the truth, that's something that we'll have to ignore when we're trying to detect deception. The other thing we see with her is a one eyebrow shrug. Her left eyebrow goes up sometimes when she's talking, and a lot of times a one eyebrow raise is an emblem of a shrug, meaning, I don't know, I have no confidence in what I just said. And a lot of times it's a pretty reliable indicator of deception. But if someone does it when they're telling the truth, that's something we're going to have to ignore when we're looking for deception later on. So now let's go through the stories, and since we already let the cat out of the bag and we know that the first story was the fabrication, let's look at that one.
Okay, so my very first weird fear.
So there was a couple of things right off the bat. She says one word, and then we see the lips disappear, and that's withholding. It's often a sign that someone is withholding an emotion or withholding information, and it's a sign of discomfort. And a lot of people don't like to lie. Most people don't want to lie, so they show signs of discomfort when they're lying. And with her, she says one word and then the lips disappear.
So my very first weird fear.
And then right there we see a big swallow, and that's also a sign of discomfort. So a lot of times when you see someone take a big deep swallow, they're uncomfortable, and a lot of times it's uncomfortable because they're being deceptive. So she's not even halfway through the first sentence, and we've already seen 2 red flags. So for me, that was enough to make me super suspicious of the first story right off the bat.
It revolves around belly buttons. So I
There's a
don't
little one
know how
shoulder shrug
to.
there, which is also a sign that you're unsure about what you're saying. So very early on, we had 3 red flags right off the bat. Disappearing lips, big deep swallow, one shoulder shrug.
And I know that that sounds already weird because, like, where.
Touching the face is also a lot of times a possible indicator of deception. Now, all of these red flags that I'm pointing out alone, you see one of them, it may not mean anything. But if you see clusters, if you see in response to, you ask someone a question and you see 2 or more red flags, or if they're telling a story and they show 2 or 3 in a relatively short time frame, that's a cluster and that's something to pay attention to. Now, throughout this video, her glasses are sliding down her nose and she pushes them back up a little bit. That is not necessarily anything, but we saw her scratch her face right here. That's not just adjusting the glasses.
I know that that sounds already weird.
So a lot of times when people touch their face, it's a possible sign of deception, because when people lie, the fight or flight response kicks in. That draws blood away from the ears, the nose, the mouth, and it kind of dries up the mouth. That's why sometimes people will lick their lips a lot, or their blink rate will increase, because things start to dry up, because your body is directing blood away from the non-essential systems and to where it's needed for the fight or flight response. So anytime someone's touching their face, that's a possible sign of deception. So we'll skip ahead a little bit because we don't need to watch the entire thing again, but right here, she also does what some people call the believe me look, or the request for approval. You do that with your eyebrows when you want someone to believe you or agree with you. Now, sometimes when it's quick, it's just what some people call an illustrator. When you talk with your hands, that's called using illustrators. I'm using my hands to say it was this big or it was really small. If your hands are being used to make a point or emphasize something or to show what you're talking about, that's called an illustrator. And it's not only the hands, sometimes your whole body gets involved, or your eyebrows when you're making a point. So if someone makes a point and the eyebrows go up just for a second, that's not a big deal. But when they stay up a little too long, that's the believe me look, the request for approval. And she does that. I mean, it's not very long, so it's kind of borderline, but she does that right here.
When I wash myself, I feel my own belly
See,
button.
the eyebrows were up there,
So I
and
hate
then
washing
up again
it.
right here. Now, that may just be an illustrator, or it may be the believe me look. I'm not really sure, but I've seen enough red flags already that I'm convinced that this is the made-up story.
And also, I hate my husband's belly button.
She had the tight lips and a deep swallow when she said she hates her husband's belly button.
My husband's belly button.
Tight lips, deep swallow.
And I hope he will never see this video, but
Okay, so we've covered the red flags, the signs of possible deception in the first story. So I want to go through the second story, and you do see some of the same red flags, but maybe not to the same degree. So with me, like I said, since the very beginning had the disappearing lips and the big deep swallow and the one shoulder shrug all in pretty rapid succession, I was pretty convinced right from the start that this was the fabrication. And so let's look at the true story for a bit.
My second story, my second weird fear, is fear of bubbles. And by bubbles I mean the foam, like when you, for example, have a bath and it's supposed to be a bubble bath and it's supposed to be like nice and romantic, maybe somebody does that for you with candles and stuff. Well, that creeps me out completely when I...
In this one, when she's talking about that fear and saying it creeps her out, it's kind of like heavy breathing, but that's congruent with someone being afraid of something.
That those bubbles were going to swallow me. That I do.
There was tension in the lips and a somewhat deep swallow there, but there wasn't as much tension and the swallow wasn't as deep. So those gestures may actually be congruent with someone who's talking about something that they're afraid of. Now, I could see how someone might go, I saw that and she's lying, but we need to consider the context, and we need to think about what triggered that response. And that response came in the middle of 2 sentences where she was recalling a fear and why she's afraid of that. So in the first story, she had the disappearing lips, and the disappearing lips came after just one word, and then the deep swallow came just a few words later. So that alone made me think right away that that story was the one that was deceptive. And in this second story, we see a few little red flags that could mean something, but we also see some congruency and some signs of truth. So that made me think, that kind of reassured me that the first story was the fake one and this one was the real one. She also seems to be talking with her hands a little bit more in the second story. And one other possible sign of deception is what they call a decrease in illustrators. If someone normally talks with their hands and then they're doing that a lot less or not at all, that's sometimes a sign of deception. So using more illustrators is often a sign that someone is not being deceptive. And she is talking with her hands a little bit more in this second story.
That's completely outside of my comfort zone.
So that brings us to the end of this video. If you'd like to help us with our Spot the Lie project, you can submit your own truth or lie video. There are instructions on our website and a link to those instructions in the description. So click the link if you'd like to help us out. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks for watching this video. If you like it, please click the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.